She said Bigfoot would come back. And it did. Not in a dream, not as a ghost, but in the dead of night, with fruit, wildflowers, and a ritual symbol no human ever taught it. What if I told you a woman once formed a bond with a creature science says doesn't exist? A real living Bigfoot. Female, gentle, protective. She didn't just see it. It saved her life after a fall, nursed her back to health, and kept returning for years. I'm Nora. I was there when Eliza, 84, reclusive and dismissed as crazy, told me about her friendship with that creature, and I'm the one who found her grave, days after her funeral, marked with offerings no person could have placed, unless they walked silently through miles of forest. In this video, I'll show you how Bigfoot healed Eliza with forest remedies unknown to modern science, the ritual sign left at her grave, matching what Eliza once described, and the darker force in that forest, the one that drove the creatures away. If you think you've heard every Bigfoot story, you haven't heard this, because some goodbyes don't need words. Under the lingering veil of morning fog, the pines stretched tall and silent like guardians of a forgotten world. The dirt road narrowed into a single-lane path, its gravel cracked by roots that pulsed faintly beneath the earth. The forest here didn't whisper. It listened. Every creak of the branches, every hush of the wind across bark, seemed deliberate, patient, expectant. Nora slowed the jeep until it rolled to a stop at the edge of a clearing where time looked like it had paused long ago. Before her stood a wooden cabin, weathered and darkened by decades of rain and shadow, its roof sagging slightly under the weight of moss and memory. She stepped out, her boots crunching over frosted leaves. The air had that brittle cold only found in high-altitude woods, sharp enough to sting but quiet enough to make you feel like you were trespassing somewhere sacred. She didn't speak. Her eyes scanned the cabin's crooked porch, the broken railing, the wind chimes long rusted into silence. Something inside her stirred. Not fear, not exactly, but a heaviness, as if the trees were watching to see if she'd remember something she wasn't supposed to forget. 40 years ago, they called Eliza mad. 40 years ago, this woman, this strange, reclusive, stubborn woman, had told the world that she'd made friends with something no one believed existed. They laughed, dismissed her. Some even pitied her. But Nora hadn't come to laugh. She had come because the dreams had started again. Dreams of trees that spoke without sound, of eyes that glowed gold behind the mist, of hands too large to be human. Reaching. She didn't knock. The door opened before she reached it, slow and silent, like it had expected her all along. Eliza stood there, smaller than she remembered from the photos, bones like splinters wrapped in wool, hair falling in a braid that looked more bark than gray. Her face was a map of years spent in silence and survival, but her eyes, God, her eyes were wild, not unhinged, alive. They didn't speak, not at first. There was a recognition between them, not familiarity, but resonance. Eliza stepped aside, and Nora entered the house, inhaling the scent of herbs dried on strings, old paper, firewood. Nothing about this place felt like it belonged to the modern world. It felt buried, like the rest of the world had forgotten it on purpose. Then, as if picking up in the middle of a conversation they hadn't yet started, Eliza asked, "Do the trees ever speak to you in your dreams?" The question hung there like a mist that wouldn't lift. Nora didn't answer with words. She nodded, slowly, without apology. Eliza's gaze deepened, her expression unreadable, but the lines around her mouth softened. Just a touch. "Then you'll understand," she said, turning toward the back room, a voice like dry leaves. "Why everyone else ran. They were never meant to see, never meant to know. But you already know, don't you?" Nora followed her into the room. It was small, barely lit. A single oil lamp flickered in the corner, casting shadows that stretched and bent with the creaks of the old wooden walls. On one side was a table cluttered with maps, not of roads or cities, but of trails, of valleys unnamed on any GPS. Symbols drawn in charcoal, loops and spirals etched into the corners. Beside them, feathers, stones, pieces of bark tied with twine. There were no pictures, no electronics, only these quiet markers, the kind you made when words failed. Nora reached out, touched a map where a black X marked the edge of a forest line. Eliza stood beside her, watching. "That's where I saw it last," she murmured. "But it wasn't him, not the one I knew. This one was different. It didn't leave footprints. It left silence and blood." Nora looked up, heart tightening. "Blood?" Eliza nodded, slow. "My neighbor's dog. Gone in a night. No howl, no struggle. Just the collar, snapped clean. And this," she opened a drawer and lifted something wrapped in cloth. Unfolded, it revealed a jawbone. Animal, but not from any prey Nora recognized. Teeth too uniform, too neat. She felt the pressure return in her chest, the weight that had followed her since the dreams began. Not fear exactly, but a knowing, an anticipation. "They said you came here to help me," Eliza said, her tone neither accusing nor grateful. "But I think you know better." Nora nodded again. "Maybe I didn't come to help you. Maybe I came because I need to understand." The wind picked up outside, and something shifted in the walls. A groan, like the house itself remembering something terrible. Eliza placed the jawbone back in the cloth and pressed her palm to her chest, right over her heart. "They taught me to listen. But now, they're quiet, too quiet." Nora mirrored her gesture, hand over her chest, pulse quickening beneath her fingers. "They're waiting," she whispered. Eliza looked out the window. "No," she said, "they're warning." And somewhere far beyond the glass, deep in the trees where light didn't reach, something moved. Not a branch, not an animal. Something taller, slower, watching. The fire cracked low in the hearth as Eliza poured 2 fingers of bourbon into mismatched glasses. The silence between them, thick with things unsaid. Nora held the glass without sipping. Her eyes were fixed on the mantel above the fireplace, where a faded photograph of a man in a hunter's cap was pinned next to a tarnished bullet casing. Outside, the wind scraped through the trees like dry claws on stone, and Nora felt the temperature drop just enough to make her skin remember it was still vulnerable. Eliza finally spoke, not looking up. "My grandfather used to say the forest owed him blood." Nora turned to her slowly, careful not to interrupt whatever memory was rising. "He'd walk into those woods like he owned them," Eliza continued. "And anything that moved was fair game. There, down, Mayan. He didn't care. He hunted because he hated being small." She leaned back, eyes distant, watching something Nora couldn't see. Then came the stories. Strange calls at night, something big moving where no elk ever dared. "My grandfather didn't believe in ghosts or monsters, but he believed in killing. So one winter, after a night of snow so thick it blanketed sound itself, he packed his Winchester and went out." Eliza's voice dropped, almost reverent. "He came back with blood on his boots, but not his own. Said he hit something, real big, something that didn't go down." Nora felt the chill again, but this time it wasn't from the weather. Eliza stood, walked to a narrow cabinet near the wall, and pulled out a box wrapped in what looked like a piece of an old tent tarp. She unrolled it on the table, revealing a map of the ridge drawn by hand with red X's marking spots that seemed random until you looked closer. A trail, a hunt. They found the snow soaked red for 20 yards, but no body, just hair, like bear fur, but thicker. And the sound, he said, like a scream, but deeper. He thought it was dying, that he'd won. Eliza lit a cigarette with hands that didn't shake, eyes sharper than they had any right to be at her age. "My father never spoke about that day. But he hid the rifle, buried it actually. Dug it up once when I was a girl, showed me the stock, split clean down the center like something had grabbed it mid-shot. Said whatever he saw wasn't dying, it was protecting something." Nora leaned in, like a parent. Eliza's expression didn't change, but her eyes held that long pause, the kind you only make when you've finally been understood. "He said it held a smaller one, like it was shielding it. Didn't charge, didn't growl, just looked at him, like it knew he had a choice. She moved back to the fireplace, and above the mantel, she pulled down the bullet casing. It gleamed faintly, too polished for something so old. He made this, Eliza said. Silver. Just one. Told me if I ever saw it again, the one with the gold eyes. But this time, it came closer. This was the only thing that might matter. Nora held it in her palm. It was heavier than it looked. Not just in weight, but in what it meant. Did he ever use it? No, Eliza whispered, because the thing he feared most wasn't the creature. It was the day he'd have to decide whether or not to pull the trigger on something that never once tried to hurt him. The silence returned. But now it wasn't empty. It was the weight of all the years that came after, the choice not to speak, the ache of carrying a truth too large for the world to accept. Outside, a gust howled, low and long through the chimney, a sound that should have been wind but felt too deliberate. Nora looked out the window. The snow had begun to fall again, light and quiet. She could see the edge of the tree line, the black line where the forest swallowed everything. She tried to picture the scene. The snow, stained crimson, the massive form of something not quite man, not quite beast, cradling its young, retreating without threat. She breathed in slowly, the image staying in her mind longer than she expected. Why did he make the silver bullet if he never meant to use it? Eliza didn't answer right away. Then she said almost to herself, because he wanted to believe he could protect us, just in case he was wrong. There was something in her voice that made Nora's skin prick. Something cracked open, fragile. It wasn't fear. It was grief, the kind of grief that never comes from losing a person, but from realizing the person you love spent their whole life misunderstood. Nora placed the bullet back on the mantel. Next to the photo, the man in the image stared out with a gaze that was both tired and fierce. She wondered what kind of ghost still followed him into those woods. Eliza sat down again, her body creaking like the old chair beneath her. You're not here to catalogue folklore, are you? No, Nora said. I think I came to learn why he didn't shoot. Eliza smiled, a small, weary thing. Then maybe you'll understand why I never left. Outside, the wind picked up again. A knock somewhere deep in the woods. A branch snapping. Too clean. Too close. Nora's spine stiffened. But Eliza didn't move. She just closed her eyes for a moment and whispered, It's not them. Not yet. And the fire dimmed. The snow had come early that year. Thick and relentless, swallowing the forest in silence. Eliza had just turned 18 and refused, as she always did, to be confined by warnings or winter. The mountains were her inheritance, carved into her bloodline by the silence of her father and the guilt of her grandfather. So when the first major storm rolled in from the north, she packed a canvas rucksack, strapped her boots tight, and vanished into the trees before sunrise. It wasn't just hunting, not really. It was a ritual, her way of claiming the land on her own terms. Her father had watched from the porch, eyes sunken with something unspoken, hands shoved deep in the pockets of a wool coat he hadn't worn since he buried the Winchester. He didn't stop her. He never did. The snow had no mercy. By the time Eliza was 5 miles in, the trail was gone. Her compass kept her steady, but the light faded too fast. Clouds blanketed the sky like wet cement. She heard nothing, no birds, no squirrels, no cracking twigs or distant calls. Even her own breath sounded swallowed. The world pressed in close and tight, and the forest stopped being a place. It became a presence. It was on the third slope, a steep incline slick with packed snow, where her boots gave out. She tried to pivot, too late. Her heel slipped, and gravity tore her sideways. The slope wasn't long, but it was violent. She crashed through scrub and brittle saplings, tumbled into a shallow ravine, and slammed shoulder first against a rock wall. The crack of bone hitting stone echoed like a rifle shot. Then everything went still. She came to in darkness. Her body felt weightless, not with ease, but with the kind of numbness that meant something inside had given up. There was no sky above her, only a jagged ceiling that glistened faintly. as if frost had grown teeth. She wasn't outside. Not anymore. There was warmth near her legs. Not fire. Fur. Thick, musky, real. She couldn't move her left arm. Pain lanced through her chest when she tried to sit up, but she was dry. Blankets or something like them lay across her. She felt herbs, sharp, bitter, crushed into a poultice near her ribs. Her fingers brushed the edge of a carved bowl. Water. Clean. Then a shadow moved. It didn't shuffle like a man. It didn't crawl like a bear. It moved like silence wearing skin. Eliza didn't scream. She couldn't. Not from fear, but from awe. The shape was massive, hunched near the far wall, not hiding, watching. Its eyes weren't glowing, but they held depth, like the center of a storm. Her breath rattled once. It didn't react. Days passed. She never asked how many. There were no clocks, no way to tell time beyond the occasional trickle of daylight at the cave's mouth. It brought her things. Berries, water, bark tea. Sometimes dried meat that didn't taste like deer. It never fed her by hand. It placed things near her and left them there. When she was strong enough to sit up, it sat opposite. It never came too close. It never left for too long. She studied it when she could. The hair was thick, not mangy. Its hands, God, the hands, were massive, with long fingers but no claws. Scarred, old, one eye was cloudy, as if it had been blinded in some fight long before she was born. It didn't look like a monster. It looked like something that had survived long enough to become myth. The cave smelled of pine resin and ash. Eliza found herself speaking into the silence, not to it, but near it, about the snow, about her father, about how she didn't belong anywhere except here, out past where maps ended and stories began. It never responded, but something about the way it stayed made her feel like the words mattered. On the 6th morning, maybe the 7th, she stood. Her legs shook. Her shoulder throbbed. But she could walk. It didn't stop her. It watched her move toward the entrance. The sky was pale and bruised with fog. Trees loomed like witnesses. She turned back. It stood there, just inside the cave, the outline half swallowed by shadow. She pressed her palm to her chest. It tilted its head. Then, slowly, deliberately, it did the same. A gesture. Not mimicry. Agreement. And then it stepped back. Eliza didn't cry until she was halfway down the ridge. And even then, it wasn't grief. It was something else. Like being unmade and rebuilt all at once. She told no one what happened. Not at first. Her father never asked. He knew. Or maybe he had once seen the same figure standing in snow and had made his own bargain of silence. From that day forward, she returned to the woods not to hunt, but to listen. Every sound became sacred. Every footstep carried intention. She left offerings at certain trees. Dry fruit, a hand-carved figure, once a silver earring. Sometimes, in the morning, they were gone. She never saw that exact shape again, not fully, but sometimes, when the fog clung low and the snow fell silent, she felt it. The presence. Not just watching, but remembering. And always, when she left the forest, she placed her hand on her heart. Just in case it was still watching, just in case it ever needed to know. It had been understood. Spring came late that year, with the snow lingering like a stubborn memory, and the buds on the trees too cautious to unfurl. Eliza had almost stopped hoping. Seasons passed differently in the forest. Slower, deeper. After her fall, her bond with the woods had changed. She moved through them with reverence now, not curiosity. Not just as someone who'd been spared, but as someone who'd been chosen to carry a secret. And that meant she returned often to the same clearing, near the same slope, where the moss grew thickest and the wind shifted in strange ways. She didn't expect to see it again. You don't expect to be granted a miracle twice. The first sign came in the form of scent. Damp earth, pine needles crushed under something massive, and a faint warm musk that wasn't quite animal, wasn't quite human. Eliza froze where she stood, her basket of dried apples in one hand, the other instinctively raised, fingers resting against her sternum. She waited. Nothing moved. The air remained tight, loaded with unspoken weight. Then, behind a tree just beyond the stream, something shifted. It emerged slowly. No urgency. No fear. It wasn't the one from the cave. This one was smaller by a few feet, leaner but no less powerful. Its hair was a lighter shade, and its gait lacked the stiffness of age. But it wasn't alone. Clutched carefully against its chest, nestled in the crook of one massive arm, was something small. It took Eliza a breath to understand what she was seeing. A child. Not quite an infant, but not older than 4 or 5. Its face was round, eyes wide, peering at her over its mother's shoulder with a seriousness that made Eliza's throat tighten. She didn't move closer. She simply reached down and placed the basket beneath a familiar pine tree, a place she'd returned to every month, a place she thought might have been forgotten. Then, something unexpected happened. The child squirmed slightly, nudged forward by the adult, and stepped out just enough to see her clearly. They locked eyes. The forest seemed to hush in response, and slowly, deliberately, the small creature placed its hand against its chest, the same gesture Eliza had once made to its kind. A gesture never taught, only felt. The breath she let out wasn't steady. She dropped to one knee without meaning to. Her hands covered her face for a moment, overwhelmed not by fear, but by the unbearable weight of being seen. Not just observed, but acknowledged. When she looked again, they were still there, waiting, not watching, participating. She stood, slowly, and took a few steps backward, never turning her back, never rushing. She understood the rhythm now. Give space, leave offerings. Return with no expectations. But even as she walked away, she knew something fundamental had changed. This was no longer a bond between strangers. She had been brought into something older, deeper, familial. In the seasons that followed, Eliza returned more frequently. The adult always kept its distance, but the child grew bolder. Each visit, it inched a little closer. Sometimes it would mimic her movements, tilting its head, crouching when she crouched. Other times, it would simply observe, its large eyes narrowing as it seemed to try to understand the strange two-legged creature who left dried berries and carved wooden figures under the tree. There were never words, not in any language Eliza had learned, but meaning came through posture, through silence, through repetition. Once, during a warm dusk in late June, the child extended a hand toward her offering without the adult's prompting. It picked up a small cloth pouch filled with seeds and tapped it gently against its chest before retreating. That night, Eliza didn't sleep. She lay awake with the windows open, listening to the woods, hearing nothing but the pulse in her ears and the rustle of leaves that no wind should have moved. One morning, months later, she came to the clearing early and found that the gifts she'd left the week before had been replaced. Not simply taken, replaced. In the exact center of the moss ring lay a cluster of wildflowers tied together with a length of braided grass. Beside it, a smooth stone with a spiral etched into its surface. The spiral was ancient, older than any language she'd ever studied, but she recognized it. It was the symbol carved into the walls of the cave where she'd once healed. She didn't cry that time. She smiled, a quiet internal thing that settled into her bones. This wasn't charity. It was reciprocity. It was reciprocity. And so, the rhythm continued. Season after season, year after year, she watched the child grow. Taller, stronger, more self-assured. She never asked questions aloud, but she learned to understand through repetition. When the child came with pine sap on its fur, it meant summer. When it carried twigs with bird feathers, it meant the birds had started nesting again. When it came alone, it meant the adult was nearby, watching unseen, allowing trust to take root. She never tried to follow them when they left. That was the unspoken rule. But something deeper than fear kept her honest. It was reverence, not worship, but respect for the boundaries that had been set long before she ever stumbled down that slope. And yet, for all the peace she found in these encounters, there was always a flicker of unease growing in the shadows of her mind. The forest had rhythms, yes, but those rhythms could break. And when they did, it wasn't nature that became dangerous. It was whatever waited to fill the silence. But not yet, not today, because today, as she stepped into the clearing and saw the child waiting there with hands folded, she knew. They hadn't just accepted her. They had claimed her. The wind that autumn had teeth. It bit through coats and splintered through windows. And in that biting came silence. Thicker, deeper than the kind Eliza had come to trust. The forest didn't sing anymore. Not the way it used to. There were no gifts beneath the pine tree, no tracks in the soft dirt, not even the faint imprint of knuckles or handprints where moss had once been carefully brushed away. At first, she told herself it was the season. The cold. Maybe migration, maybe some shift in instinct or rhythm. But in her bones she knew better. Absence was not the same as stillness. This wasn't the forest pausing. This was it holding its breath. Then came the night. Eliza didn't light a lantern. She sat by the window, her hands curled around a cup of bitter root tea, eyes fixed on the trees. At first she thought she'd imagined it. The rustle, the hesitation in the underbrush. But it wasn't just imagination. Something moved. Slow. Deliberate. She stepped out onto the porch without a coat, the chill shocking her system awake. And there it was. Not the one she had come to know. Not the child, but the first. He stood at the tree line, taller than she remembered, more gaunt. His fur, once full, looked thinner now, patchy in places like something had burned through parts of him that would never grow back. He didn't approach. He didn't lower his head the way he once had. He just stood there, and in his eyes, there was something else. Panic. Not of her, but of something chasing him. Eliza didn't speak. She pressed her palm to her chest, the old signal, a whisper through the darkness. I see you. I remember. I still choose you. And slowly, he raised his hand in return. But then he turned, not into the woods, not toward the old trails. He looked deeper, past everything, into the places even she had never walked. The next morning, she checked the clearing. The spiral was gone, brushed away like it had never been carved. The bark offerings she'd tied with care had been torn down, not broken, ripped, split clean, strands still dangling. Her breath caught in her throat when she saw the earth. It had been dug through, not by claw, by something larger, something heavier. And then the gifts began to rot. The next time she left fruit, it came back bruised, crushed, smelling of iron and bile. The air around the drop point felt colder than the rest of the forest. Once she found feathers, shredded, not molted. Another time, a small piece of fur curled at the edges, like it had been burned with acid. The forest had always watched her, but now it stared. She didn't see the child again. Not that season. Not the one after. And then came the final visit. It was just after first frost, the ground hardening beneath the fallen needles. She was chopping wood when the dogs started howling. They never howled at deer. Not like that. It was the kind of sound animals make when they recognize the shape of something that shouldn't exist. By the time she got to the edge of the trees, he was there, alone. No child, no offerings. His breathing was shallow, laboring. His shoulder sagged like it had been broken and rebroken too many times to heal properly. His left hand, always steady, now shook as it lifted toward her, then pressed flat against his own chest. Hard, not soft like before, not ceremonial. This was something else. Urgency, warning, goodbye. Then he turned, not slowly this time, not with reverence. He moved like something was chasing him, and this time he didn't look back. She stood there until the cold in her lungs forced her to turn in. And that night, she left no lights on, not as an invitation, but as a sign. She understood now. It wasn't just a farewell. It was a passing of something, a burden, a responsibility. A secret passed from one guardian to another. The next day, she packed away the maps. She sealed the offerings in cedar boxes. She carved the spiral again, but this time into stone, deep enough it would never fade. It wasn't for them. It was for what might come next, because she had seen his eyes, and in them, the quiet agony of something ancient being forced out, and something else taking its place. Something that didn't kneel, didn't offer gifts, didn't understand the pact. Something that only understood hunger. As autumn deepened, shadows began to stretch in unexpected ways around Eliza's cabin, and tension draped the forest like a heavy cloak. One morning, Nora noticed the coop door ajar. Its latch snapped cleanly from the inside, and no blood stained the ground. The hens had vanished. Next to the entrance, a single track impressed in the soft earth. A foot far larger than any bear's, but strangely narrow in the arch, with elongated toes that ended in blunt pads. She knelt, tracing the outline with a trembling finger. This wasn't the creature she had befriended. It was something else entirely. Something older and colder. And because there was no blood, only vanished flesh, Eliza knew. Whatever did this wasn't hunting. It was selecting. Nora asked the neighbors about odd sounds, and they told her stories she couldn't shake. A wolf-like howl in the dead of night, too deep and resonant to belong to any known animal, followed by silence so complete it swallowed their lamps. Livestock left mutilated, throats cut clean, organs removed with methodical detachment. One farmer, pale-eyed and trembling, described how his calf was drained of warmth, as though its very soul had been pulled out, leaving only a husk. Nora pressed him. What did it sound like? He shook his head. Deeper than death. She swallowed against the rising panic. That night, candlelight flickered against rough-hewn walls as Eliza pinned a crude map above the hearth, points marked where the chickens went missing, where the howl shattered windows, and where the calf's body was found. The points formed a rough circle around her property, expanding outward like a warning. Nora watched her draw thin lines connecting them, tension in her jaw visible, even in the flickering light. Each line pulsed with danger. Then Nora found it. A small shard of bone at the edge of the map's boundary. Human size, fragile, too brittle for a wild animal, and too deliberate for scavengers. She holding it like a relic, skin prickling as she searched for anything else. No feathers, no fur, only the clean white snap of broken earth. She did not show it to Eliza. Some pieces are too sharp to share. As moonlight crept through the windows, both women sat in silence, facing the unknown. Eliza poured 2 steaming mugs of tea, her hands purposeful and steady. She slid one across the table. They're testing the line, she said quietly. They're probing. Nora swallowed hard, carelessly brushing bone fragments into her palm before hiding them. Eliza's eyes tracked the darkness beyond the window. Whatever's out there, she continued, knows our bond, and it fears we might stop it. Outside, tree branches tapped against the roof like knuckles trying to speak. A distant guttural growl echoed through the forest. A sound you believe you remember once hearing, but never thought you'd feel in your chest. The lights flickered. Nora's heart thudded as she realized this was no longer about friendship or warning. It was war. Eliza rose, crossing to the door and leaving it cracked. She stared into the wood, breathing in its cold secrets. We move tonight, she said, voice low. We show them we hold ground. Nora nodded, tightening the scarf around her neck. They gathered essentials. Maps. The silver bullet hidden in her coat pocket. Dried fruit in hand. No more offerings. This time, they would not invite. They would stand. The forest watched as they stepped beyond the porch light, darkness swallowing them the moment they left the cabin's perimeter. Behind them, the coop lay empty, but their resolve burned bright. And deep in the trees, just beyond where lanterns died, something watched back, its gaze heavy, knowing that the line between 2 worlds had been drawn. And tonight, someone would test its strength. It started just after midnight. A sharp click from the motion sensor outside the porch window. Nora blinked awake to a pool of light spilling through the front yard, bright and unnatural against the sea of pitch surrounding the cabin. The sensor rarely went off. Deer, Maybe wind on occasion, but not like this. There had been no sound, no rustle of leaves, no gravel shift beneath weight, only silence, broken by the sudden electric glare. Then the dog barked, once, twice, then nothing. Nora swung her legs off the cot. Pulling on boots and grabbing the old shotgun Eliza kept beneath the coat rack. Her breath hung in the air, frost curling around the frame of the window as she peered out. There was movement, not fast, not skittish. Something tall was pacing the edge of the light, just beyond the sensor's reach. It moved like it didn't care about being seen, like it knew no one here could stop it. A low thud shook the porch steps, another, then a third, each impact heavy and deliberate. Nora stepped back from the glass, heart pounding, and turned to Eliza, already standing with one hand against the wall for balance, and the other clutching a heavy rusted flare gun. Her eyes didn't show fear, only recognition. "That's not them," she said. Outside, a fourth thud cracked the front panel. Wood splintered slightly, not shattered, not forced, but pressed, measured. Eliza moved to the hallway and threw the deadbolt on the back door. This one doesn't knock. It challenges. Nora's hands trembled as she chambered the first shell, metal clinking in a way that echoed through her chest. She opened the drawer beside the table and pulled out the silver bullet. Heavy, cold. She slipped it into her jacket, separate from the rest. A final choice. Another slam against the wall. This time harder. The lights flickered. A painting dropped from the hallway with a crash. From outside, a sound rose. Not a growl. Not human. It was a wheezing exhale, as though something long dead had forced breath back into lungs not meant to carry it. And then the dog whimpered once from under the porch and went silent forever. They didn't run. They waited. The thudding stopped. Then the sound changed. Scraping. Not claws. Hands. Large, unyielding palms dragging across the siding, nails, or something like them scoring across wood. It circled the house once, slow. Then a second time, faster. Each pass brought it closer to the windows. Then silence. It was worse than noise. Nora didn't realize she'd stopped breathing until a knock came. Not from the door. From the roof. Eliza's face went rigid. "It's testing structure now." Nora raised the shotgun. Eyes locked on the ceiling. Dust fell from between the beams. A second knock. Then a sprint. 4 heavy footfalls racing across the cabin's top and launching off into the woods. They exhaled together. A minute passed. Then 2. Then came the headlights. A neighbor's truck barreled up the drive, its tires grinding over frost. A man in flannel stepped out, rifle in hand. Behind him, another truck. Then, a third. Locals, all of them pale and grim-faced, answering the same unseen call. "We saw the light go. Heard something out back. Thought you might be." He stopped as the motion sensor clicked on again. This time from the rear of the property. They turned together, weapons raised, and it stepped into view, tall, broader than any man, any bear, but not shaggy. Its fur was coarse, patchy, and clung to skin that shimmered like damp stone. Its eyes glowed, not amber like before, but red, not vibrant, burning. It stared at them without blinking, breath visible in long, unnatural puffs. One of the men fired. The shot landed. It didn't flinch. It stepped forward. Another shot. Still no reaction. Then a third man yelled and loosed both barrels into the creature's chest. The thing stopped, but only to tilt its head, slow and snake-like, then crouch and leap into the darkness in a blur of motion that made no sense. The forest swallowed it again. Eliza didn't speak. She walked to where the creature had stood and bent down. There, pressed into the earth, were prints, deep, massive, but wrong. The toes curled differently. The heel was narrow and elongated. The weight distribution was off. This thing didn't walk like an animal. It stalked like a shadow taught to move in skin. She turned back toward the group. "That wasn't him." The neighbor with the rifle shook his head, pale. "That thing didn't feel alive. It didn't even bleed right. It doesn't bleed, Eliza said flatly, because it doesn't die. Not the way we think. Nora met her gaze. It's not Bigfoot. No, Eliza said. It's something that comes after. From the trees, a wind shifted, and in it, for the briefest moment, they heard what might have been a whisper, or a warning, before it vanished again into silence. The snow had not yet melted when Eliza passed. 8 months after the last night they faced the thing in the woods. She slipped away quietly in her sleep, her breath thin and even, her body still but resolute, as though even in dying she had chosen her moment. There was no ambulance, no ceremony, only Nora, the priest from the township church, and a handful of neighbors who knew better than to ask too many questions. They buried her beneath the old pine at the edge of her land, the one where she'd once seen the child mimic her. It was spring in theory, but the forest still held its frost like a bruise. As the prayers faded into silence, the priest bowed his head, mumbling words about rest and return. Nora stood at the foot of the grave, wind curling around her legs. She felt the shift before she saw it, a flutter in the tree line. Not animal, not wind, a shadow taller than any man slipping through the evergreens with weightless precision. She didn't turn, didn't flinch, but she saw others do it. Just a twitch of their shoulders, the quiet angle of their eyes. Something had passed by, something watching. She didn't tell them. She didn't need to. 3 days later, she returned alone. The headstone was simple. Eliza's name, 2 dates, nothing more. But it had changed. Not the stone itself, the space around it. At its base, someone or something had left an offering. A stack of wild berries, fresh and unblemished, a bundle of fern leaves tied with woven bark, and nestled between them, a spiral of twigs and moss, identical to the ones Eliza had once described from the cave walls. Nora crouched, fingertips trembling as she traced the outer edge. It wasn't art, it was memory. She looked toward the trees. No movement, no sound. And still, she felt the pull. Over the next week, she came back again, then again, and each time, the offering changed. Once it was a pine cone carved delicately with a spiral. Another time, it was an old bone wrapped in cloth, clean, hollow, etched with shallow scratches that formed no language but felt like one anyway. But on the 7th visit, there was nothing waiting, only silence, the kind she had learned to read. Beyond the grave and into the forest, the trail wasn't there, but she knew where to go. Through the thickest part of the grove, past the stump carved by lightning, over the bend where moss grew red in spring, until she reached it, the clearing, the one Eliza had protected. It had changed, too. The trees leaned differently now. Branches weighted low like mourning. But the space felt lived in, used, watched. At the center, where the earth was bare, something had been pressed into dirt, not with hands, with presence. A ring of smoothed soil, and in the center, another spiral, larger this time, as though it marked not just a visit, but a decision. She stood at the edge, her breath catching. Then she stepped into the ring, her boots sinking slightly into the damp ground. She knelt, pressed her palm to her chest, not to call, not to ask, but to say, "I'm still here." For a moment, nothing moved. Then came the shift. Leaves rustled, not from wind, but from passage. The light dimmed slightly, not cloud but mass. And though she did not turn, she knew she was not alone. A scent rode the air, bark, ash, warmth, something that did not belong to the world of towns or roads. Something that remembered. She didn't speak. She only nodded. The forest held her in that stillness, and in that stillness, a presence stepped forward, not into sight, but into knowing. She felt it like a hum beneath her skin, like a thread tying her to something vast and wordless. And then, faintly, from the trees, a shape, small, cautious. The child, older now, taller, its gaze steadier. It stepped into the spiral, stood across from her and raised one hand, pressed it to its chest. A mirror. She didn't cry. She only mirrored it back. And in that moment, something changed. Not just in her, but in the air, in the rhythm of the woods. It wasn't just memory now. It was continuity. When she returned to the cabin, she didn't wipe her boots. She left the door open for a moment longer than usual, letting the scent of trees follow her in. Later that night, as she lit a candle in the window, she looked back out into the dark and said, not aloud, but in the way Eliza had taught her, "I'm listening." There was no answer. But she didn't need one, because the flame flickered in the glass just once, toward the trees. And she understood. This was no longer Eliza's story. It had always been something more. And now, it was hers to carry. There are stories that come to us as warnings, cautionary tales wrapped in shadow and silence. Others arrive as whispers, quiet invitations to look closer at the cracks in what we thought was real. But sometimes, a story is neither warning nor invitation. Sometimes, it's a bridge, a fragile, sacred thread woven between the known and the unseen, between the world of reason and the world of wonder. And once you've crossed it, nothing ever looks quite the same again. Because deep down, we all want to believe in something more. Something beyond the grind of everyday life. Not to escape reality, but to feel connected to a deeper truth that pulses beneath the surface of things. A truth that says not all monsters are meant to be feared, and not all mysteries are meant to be honored. Held close, kept alive through a remembrance, respect, and reverence for what we do not fully understand. This story, like the forest it echoes through, doesn't end with answers. It ends with awareness, a reminder that the line between myth and memory is thinner than we think. That sometimes, the most powerful truths are the ones that live just beyond language, where silence speaks louder than words, and presence is proof enough. In a world that moves faster than our hearts can sometimes keep up with, it's easy to forget that the quietest places often hold the most profound lessons. That listening, to nature, to instinct, to stories passed in hushed tones, can be an act of courage. And that empathy, real empathy, isn't about fixing or naming. It's about witnessing, about showing up, even when the light flickers and the woods feel endless, especially then. So maybe this tale wasn't just about creatures hiding in the trees. Maybe it was about the parts of ourselves we hide too. The parts that long to be understood without being exposed. The parts that crave connection but fear what it might cost. And maybe, just maybe, the ones we fear the most are the ones who reflect us back most honestly. Wounded, wild, resilient. We thank you for joining us on this journey. If this story stirred something in you, curiosity, fear, wonder, or even a question, don't let it fade. Share your thoughts in the comments below. We want to hear what you believe, or what you doubt. And if you'd like more stories that reach into the dark corners of the unknown and pull back something worth feeling, subscribe and follow the channel. We're just getting started.